The letter arrived on a Thursday, sealed in wax the color of rust, its handwriting delicate and old-fashioned. Eleanor Moore, seated at her desk in the smoky offices of the Spokane Herald, stared at it with a mixture of suspicion and intrigue. Most days her mail consisted of bills or crank tips from war veterans claiming to have seen ghosts in France. But this was different. The envelope bore no return address, just her name and the words, "For truth beyond memory." She opened it with care. "Dear Miss Moore, in the north of Idaho, past the river's bend and the pine-shadowed ridges, lies a village named Willow's Rest. Since the autumn of 1936, not a single child has been born there. No one has died. The church bells have not tolled. The cemetery has no fresh stones. Time, it seems, has taken its leave. If truth is what you seek, come before the frost. A friend." At first, Ellie scoffed. A hoax, no doubt. Some recluse trying to sell a book or stir up attention. Still, something about the tone, the way it avoided drama, made her stomach twist. She brought the letter to her editor, Harold Kemper, a rotund man with coffee stains on his tie and skepticism in his bones. "You think this is worth a column?" he asked, lighting a cigarette. "Sounds like backwoods superstition. No births or deaths in 12 years? Come on." Ellie crossed her arms. "There's specificity, dates, a named village. This isn't random." Harold exhaled smoke. "Fine. You've earned your vacation days. Take a week, but if you come back with a goose chase, you're covering county fairs for the next year." She nodded. That night, the letter still in her coat pocket, Ellie packed her bags. The next morning, with a typewriter case slung over her shoulder and a half-filled notebook in hand, she boarded the northbound train. The ride was long and cold, cutting through the dense wilderness of Idaho like a steel blade through silence. Trees stretched endlessly, yellow leaves swirling in slow descent. At every stop, fewer passengers remained. By the time she reached the last station, she was alone. The conductor, an old man with clouded eyes, didn't offer to help with her luggage. Instead, as she stepped down onto the platform, he muttered, "You're heading up to Willows, ain't you?" Ellie stiffened. "Yes. You shouldn't go alone." She looked him in the eye. "Why not?" He shrugged, stepping back onto the train. "That place don't breathe right." Before she could respond, the train hissed and pulled away, vanishing into the pines. She found the road to Willow's Rest by instinct and compass, her boots crunching over brittle leaves. The sun sank fast, as if retreating from the land ahead. A signpost, nearly swallowed by undergrowth, finally greeted her. Willow's Rest, Est, 1874. Below it, someone had scrawled in fading paint, "Where time stands still." She felt a shiver, not from the cold, but something else, an instinct older than fear. What kind of town doesn't welcome new life? What kind of town holds on to everyone forever? A shadow moved in the trees, and if this story already has your heart beating a little faster, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. More hidden truths, haunted histories, and forgotten legends await you, and trust me, this one's only beginning. Ellie stepped through the gates of Willow's Rest as dusk fell fully, not knowing that what waited beyond the tree line wasn't just a story. It was a reckoning. Willow's Rest was not marked on most maps. Ellie had checked 3 and only one. A faded county surveyor's chart from 1912 had it scribbled in the margins. No major roads led in or out. Only a winding dirt trail, cloaked by evergreens, traced its way into the village like a forgotten thought. The sun had disappeared behind the ridges when she reached the outskirts. A row of wooden homes sat nestled against the slope, their windows dark, their porches swept clean. The air was thick with pine and silence. Not quiet, but silence, the kind that pressed against the skin like damp cloth. She stepped into Main Street expecting dogs barking, the creak of rocking chairs, maybe the distant clang of a dinner bell. Instead, she was met with stillness so deep it felt staged. There were no children playing, no horses tied up, no flickering lamps, just neat homes and shuttered storefronts. A sign swung above the post office, "Open since 1892. The door was closed. The general store across the street had clean windows but no customers. A barber shop boasted shaves and tonic, 10 siwon, yet its chairs were empty. Everything looked lived in but untouched, like a museum that forgot to collect dust. She walked slowly, her footsteps the only sound. Behind a lace curtain, a face moved. A woman, middle-aged, eyes wide and watching, but the curtain fell shut before Ellie could raise a hand. A bell chimed suddenly. soft and high. Ellie turned to see a small inn, its front porch bathed in the orange glow of gaslight. A man stood at the doorway, grey-haired, with a thin, weary smile. "Evening, miss," he said. "You'll be wanting a room." Ellie nodded. "I'm looking for Willow's Rest." "This is it," he said. "Been it for a long while." He introduced himself as Marvin Talbot, keeper of the Everstill Inn. The place had 6 rooms, he said, though only 2 were occupied, and one had been empty since his wife passed in '32. She asked about supper. He offered stew and coffee, both modest but warm. The dining area was spotless, with faded wallpaper and oil paintings of mountains that no longer seemed real. "Not many come this way," Marvin said as he poured her coffee, "especially not in the fall. Too quiet for most." "I heard there's something strange about this place," Ellie said gently. Marvin's hands stilled on the table. He didn't answer right away. "There's peace here," he said eventually. "That's all. A kind of stillness you don't find much anymore." Ellie watched him carefully. "Since 1936? Marvin looked up. His eyes were pale and dry. "That's the year we stopped changing," he said. "Some say it's a curse. Others say it's a mercy." Before she could ask more, a loud knock broke the moment. Marvin stood, his chair scraping loudly across the floor. A tall man in a deputy's coat stepped into the doorway, removing his hat. Salt and pepper hair, lined face, unreadable gaze. "Sheriff Griggs," Marvin said quietly. Griggs looked at Ellie. "We heard someone new came into town. Didn't expect a reporter." Ellie met his gaze. "How do you know I'm a reporter?" "We don't get many strangers," he replied, "and you've got questions in your eyes." Marvin offered to show her to her room. The sheriff watched her climb the stairs, then turned and walked out without another word. Inside, the room smelled of cedar and something older. The window faced the hills. No birds sang. No dogs barked. Somewhere far off, a wind moved the trees, but the village remained untouched. Ellie sat at the edge of the bed, notebook open. She wrote one sentence. "This town has not taken a breath in 12 years. She paused, pen hovering. "And if you're still here, listening, wondering what she'll uncover next, don't go anywhere. The truth behind Willow's Rest is only beginning to surface." Ellie woke early. The town outside her window looked exactly as it had the night before. Calm, untouched, eternal. The sky was pale and cloudless, the kind that offered no warmth despite its clarity. She dressed quickly, notebook in hand, determined to speak to anyone willing to tell her what the sheriff would not. Her first stop was the post office. It was open now, though dimly lit inside. An elderly man named Vernon ran it. He greeted her politely, but the moment she asked about the letter that brought her there, he stiffened. No sender's name. "Strange," he muttered, flipping through a ledger. "Could have come through with the Spokane drop, but I'd remember something like that." She thanked him and stepped back outside, heart sinking. If the sender didn't live in the town, or had chosen not to be known, she'd have to dig deeper. She spotted a wooden sign that read, "Doctor's House," hand-painted and faded by rain. The shutters were crooked, and a bird's nest had claimed the awning. She knocked once, then again. Eventually the door creaked open. Dr. Lenhard was taller than she expected. He wore a wrinkled shirt, no tie, and his eyes were yellowed with age and disuse. He studied her in silence before speaking. "You're not from here." "I'm not," Ellie said, "but I'm trying to understand what happened to this town." He exhaled sharply. "You're 12 years too late." Ellie introduced herself and asked if she could come in. He didn't answer, just turned and walked back into the dim hallway. She followed, careful not to trip on a rug so threadbare it looked like skin. The doctor's home was lined with books and charts, anatomy posters curled on the walls. A grandfather clock ticked, though its hands pointed at noon and didn't move. He offered no chair. Ellie stood, notebook open. "What happened in 1936?" she asked. His face tightened. "I signed 2 certificates that year, one birth, one death. They were the last. Can you tell me who they were?" He hesitated. "Margaret Wynne gave birth to a baby girl in October, died in childbirth. Her husband buried her himself. We had a funeral, a real one. After that, nothing. No stillbirths, no illnesses, not even accidents." He gave her a look that would have withered trees. "I'm a man of science. I kept records, vaccinated children, monitored pregnancies. I've delivered nearly everyone in this town, but after October 1936, there was nothing left to monitor." Ellie leaned in. "Did people stop trying to have children?" "Some tried," he said, "but the women, they didn't conceive. And the old didn't pass. I treated a man in 41 with a crushed ribcage. Should have died in days. He lived, still lives. His bones healed wrong. Are you saying no one can die here? He looked at her sharply. I'm saying no one has. There was something in his voice, resentment, even rage. I used to matter, he said quietly. I had a purpose. Now I'm a relic, same as that damn clock. Ellie let the silence stretch. Do you think it's natural? She asked. What happened? He walked to a cabinet and retrieved a worn journal. He opened it to a marked page showing a list of names, births, deaths, illnesses, all neatly written. The final line read, Margaret Wynne, 10-12-36, maternal hemorrhage. Then, blank pages. I don't know what it is, he said, but I do know this. When something alive stops changing, it's not alive anymore. It's just preserved. She left him standing in the doorway, clutching the book like a spine. Outside, the air felt thicker, and still no birds. If you're feeling the chill in your chest right now, you're not alone. Something unnatural happened in Willow's Rest, and someone remembers exactly why. The morning passed in a haze of suspicion and silence. Ellie walked the streets of Willow's Rest with the distinct sense that eyes followed her from behind curtains. She kept her notebook tucked close to her chest, wary of spooking anyone further. The town looked ordinary, but its quiet carried the weight of something unnatural. At the edge of the schoolyard she saw movement, small, fast, and alive. A boy, no older than 7, darted across the grass, chasing a paper airplane. His laughter, soft and breathless, was the first spontaneous sound she'd heard since arriving. He didn't notice her at first. Then he paused, holding the paper glider, and looked up. His face was pale but warm, with a mop of sandy hair and eyes that gleamed with curiosity. She waved gently. Hi there, she said. I'm Ellie. He didn't speak, but nodded. Then he turned and ran toward the schoolhouse door, disappearing inside. Moments later, a woman emerged. Early 30s, sharp features softened by fatigue, her dress neat but faded. She walked with the stillness of someone who's spent years in restraint. I'm Clara Wynne, she said. Thomas's mother. Thomas? Ellie asked. How old is he? Clara hesitated. 7. Ellie tilted her head. He looks small. Was he born here? Clara's smile was tight. Yes. He's the last child in Willow's Rest. Ellie caught the phrasing. The last. Not the youngest. They stood in silence. Then Clara added, I heard you've been asking questions. Some things are better left alone. Ellie kept her tone even. A doctor showed me his records. They stopped with a woman named Margaret Wynne in 1936. Any relation? Clara nodded. My sister-in-law. Ellie's breath caught. So Thomas was born days before she died, Clara said. A hard time. Grief weighs heavier in a small place. Ellie scribbled notes, then paused. But he's 7. That would make him born in 41. Clara's jaw tightened. He's small for his age. Ellie didn't push, not yet. Instead, she changed tack. Why do you think no other children have been born since? Clara glanced toward the schoolhouse. Maybe we were cursed, maybe we were blessed. No one's buried a child in 12 years, that counts for something. But no one's held a newborn either. No, she said quietly. They haven't. The conversation ended there. Clara turned and went back inside, the door closing behind her with finality. Ellie returned to the inn to gather her thoughts. She reread her notes from the doctor. The birth in October 1936, the death of Margaret Wynne, the empty pages that followed. She thought of Thomas's face, of how his voice hadn't yet cracked, how his arms still moved like a toddler's, but his eyes, those were eyes that had seen too much. At the corner of the inn's porch, Marvin was polishing the railing. Ellie approached. Do you know the boy? She asked. Thomas? Marvin said. Everyone does. He's the only one who still runs. He's Clara Wynne's son. She said he's 7. That makes no sense. Marvin didn't look at her. Clara lost her husband in the mines just after the boy was born. Or maybe before. Hard to keep the years straight around here. Why? Because nothing ever changes, he said simply. Ellie sat down, notebook forgotten in her lap. If Thomas was born before 1936, that makes him 12. But he looks 7. Marvin met her gaze. Some clocks don't tick, he said. And some of us, we like it that way. She didn't reply, because deep down, she was starting to feel it too. The way time bent in this place, how the air held its breath, how the boy who shouldn't be might hold the key to everything. The fog rolled in that afternoon, soft and low, wrapping the town like a secret. Ellie sat outside the inn with a cup of lukewarm coffee, watching the grey drift between the trees. Her thoughts circled like crows. Every conversation she'd had so far pointed to 1 year, 1936. Every answer hovered on the edge of confession, but never stepped over. She needed someone who would. Marvin passed her as he swept the porch. "Try the library," he said without prompting. "No one goes there but Miss Daly, and she remembers everything." It was 3 blocks east, nestled between the chapel and a shuttered bakery. The sign above the door read, "Willow's Rest Public Archives," the word library carefully painted over in newer ink. Inside, the air was cold and dry, scented with old pages and oil. Miss Daly sat behind the front desk, her grey hair pinned in a tight bun, her glasses cracked at one corner. She looked up slowly. "You're the reporter," she said, not a question. "I'm looking for records, anything from 1936. She stared at Ellie for a long moment. Then, without a word, rose and led her to a locked cabinet near the back. She pulled out a small key and turned it with a click that echoed through the quiet. "There," she said, opening a drawer. Inside were folders marked with dates. Ellie found the one for October 1936. Inside, newspapers, handwritten notes, and a photograph, the Harvest Festival. It was a black and white image, slightly blurred, showing townsfolk gathered near the chapel, smiling, holding lanterns. She recognized Marvin, a younger Dr. Lenhard, even Sheriff Griggs, tall and serious. And there, in the back corner, half-shadowed by the chapel door, stood a man she didn't recognize. Pale eyes, dark suit, hands in his pockets. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't looking at the camera. He was looking directly at her. Ellie blinked. Of course he wasn't, but her skin crawled anyway. "Who's this?" she asked, pointing to the figure. Miss Daly didn't move. "No one remembers his name," she said at last. "He came the week before the festival. Quiet, polite, stayed at the inn. Didn't speak much. Did he work here? No. He just watched." What happened after? Miss Daly closed the drawer. After that festival, everything stopped. She walked away, slowly, as if she'd already said too much. Back at the inn, Ellie studied the photo again. The man was wrong. That was the only word that fit. He didn't belong in the frame, not in that posture, not with those eyes. She brought it to Marvin. He looked at it without touching it. "That's him." "Who was he?" Marvin shrugged. "Never said a name. Stayed 4 nights. Paid in coins older than dirt. Smiled too much. And then, gone. The night of the festival. Next morning, folks woke up different. Some said they felt lighter. Others just said they stopped dreaming." Ellie stared. "You think he did something to the town?" Marvin didn't answer. Instead, he looked out toward the hills where the fog moved like a living thing. "I think we let him." The silence between them was loud. Later that night, Ellie sat by the window in her room, the photo pressed to her lap. She thought about the stillness, the absence of death, the frozen years. And now, this man, unknown and unspoken, standing at the moment it all began. The town had buried the memory, but memory always finds its way back. If your spine just tingled, you're not imagining it. Something came to Willow's Rest in 1936, and when it left, time forgot how to move. In every small town, there are traditions so old they seem to breathe with the land. In Willow's Rest, that tradition was the Harvest Festival. Ellie found a faded flyer pinned behind glass in the library's hallway. October 12th, 1936, bonfire, lantern walk, autumn blessings. It was the last one ever held. She asked Miss Daly about it the next morning. The librarian didn't speak at first. Instead, she unlocked another cabinet and handed Ellie a box marked Harvest 36. Inside, dried flower crowns, singed ribbons, and a list of names. "There were songs," Miss Daly said softly. "Dances. Everyone brought something to the table. Pies, jars of preserves. The whole town was there." "Except afterward," Ellie said. Miss Daly nodded. "We never did it again. No one spoke of why." That phrase kept repeating itself around town. No one spoke of why. Ellie visited the chapel next. Its wooden steps creaked under her boots. Inside, the pews were perfectly aligned, untouched by time. But there was dust on the altar, a thick layer like ash. No candles burned. No hymns waited. Behind the pulpit stood Reverend Jonah Kemp. He was in his 40s, though the heaviness in his shoulders made him look older. He didn't seem surprised to see her. "You've come to ask about the festival," he said. Ellie nodded. "I heard you stopped preaching after that night." "I didn't stop," he said. "I just ran out of words." He walked to a shelf behind the altar and took down a Bible. Its pages were worn, bookmarked with scraps of cloth. "I was the one who welcomed him," he said quietly. "The stranger. I said he was sent by the Lord to remind us of our blessings. He never spoke against it. Just listened." Ellie waited, letting him unspool the memory on his own. The night of the festival, he stood at the edge of the crowd. Never smiled, never laughed, just watched. And when the bonfire lit, something in the air changed. You could feel it in your bones. He looked away. "The next morning, I couldn't remember the words to the Lord's Prayer." Ellie swallowed. "You mean forgotten entirely?" "I mean they vanished," he said. "Not just from me, from scripture, from memory. I held the book open and the page was blank. Others saw it too. Blank? Clean, as if it had never been printed." Ellie stared at him. "You think the stranger did that?" "I think we did," he said. "We invited peace into our hearts. And peace came. But peace isn't always the gift you think it is." Outside, the wind rattled the window panes. A bell, unused for years, groaned on its rusted hinge. Back at the inn, Ellie asked Marvin if he remembered the festival. He didn't answer right away. Then, softly, "I kissed a girl that night," he said. "My first real kiss. Firelight on her cheeks. I never saw her again." "Did she leave town?" "No," he said. "She's still here, lives down the lane. But it was like we both forgot how to feel it." Ellie thought of the town's silence, of Clara's cold voice, of Dr. Lenhard's resentment, of the boy who didn't grow. They weren't living. They were paused. She wrote in her notebook, "The festival didn't bless them. It sealed them. If that idea unsettles you, it should. A celebration meant to honor life became the moment it was locked away, and the people of Willow's Rest have been trapped ever since." The church bells had not rung in 12 years. Ellie returned to the chapel that evening. Reverend Kemp had gone, but the doors were unlocked. She stepped inside, drawn by something that felt older than memory. The sanctuary was darker now, lit only by the last rays of sun filtering through stained glass. Dust hung like ghosts in the air. She walked past the pews, running her fingers along the wood. Each step echoed. Behind the altar, she found a narrow stairwell descending beneath the building. No signs, no warnings, just stone steps and darkness. She lit a match. The cellar was small, lined with old hymnals and forgotten relics. In the far corner, a wooden crate held rolled-up scrolls, cracked with age. Among them, a single item stood out, a ledger bound in black leather, stamped in gold with the word "Witness." She opened it. Inside were handwritten notes, Reverend Kemp's. Each entry chronicled a service, a prayer, a confession. Then, abruptly, after the Harvest Festival of 1936, the ink changed. The handwriting grew erratic. "I no longer hear him. Their eyes do not weep." He stood beside the altar and smiled, and no one noticed. The final page read, "We agreed, though no one said it aloud." Ellie closed the book, heart pounding. Later, she found Kemp in the graveyard behind the church, sitting on a stone bench with a cigarette between his fingers. He didn't look at her as she approached. "You found the ledger," he said. "Why did you stop writing?" He took a long drag. "Because I stopped believing my words mattered." "You wrote, 'We agreed.' What did that mean?" He glanced at her. "Grief is heavy, Miss Moore. Too heavy for a town like this. We lost too much too quickly. Sons to war, wives to illness, babies before breath. That man came, and we didn't need to ask what he offered. We just let it happen." "You're saying the town made a pact?" "No one signed anything, no rituals, but we felt it. That quiet promise, no more pain, no more funerals, no more screaming in the night. And in return, no more children, no more joy, no more change." Ellie stood still, the wind brushing through the headstones behind them. "Why haven't you told anyone?" He looked at her, eyes rimmed in red. "Because none of us remember the moment it happened, just the result. And when you lose the how, you start to doubt the why. You think maybe it's natural, maybe it's chance, but deep down, we all know better." Ellie took a breath. "Do you regret it?" He looked at the sky. Every day, a gust swept across the cemetery, stirring the dead leaves. Kemp's cigarette burned down to the filter. He flicked it into the grass. "I buried my mother in 35, he said. "Last funeral I performed. I still see her face in dreams. But I can't cry. Haven't in years. Ellie felt the notebook in her coat, its spine pressing against her ribs like a heartbeat. Will you help me bring the truth to light? She asked. He didn't answer, but he didn't say no. That night, as she lay awake in her narrow bed, Ellie thought of the ledger, of the man who never gave his name, of a town that chose silence over sorrow, and got both. And if you're still listening, still wondering what came next, remember this: choices made in fear echo louder than those made in courage, and Willow's Rest hasn't stopped echoing. Ellie began dreaming in Willow's Rest. Not simple dreams, no memories of childhood, or the scattered images of daily worry. These were lucid and vivid, almost tangible. The first came the night after she spoke to Reverend Kemp. She stood in a room filled with cradles. Each one rocked gently, but no babies cried. When she approached, she saw that they were empty, and yet she felt the weight of tiny hands clutching her fingers, invisible and cold. She woke with a gasp, sweat dampening her collar. The next night was worse. She dreamed of an open field where gravestones floated above the earth, untethered by dirt or grief. One by one, they shattered in silence, the names on them vanishing before her eyes. The last to remain bore no inscription, just a date, October 12, 1936. She knew without being told it was hers. In the morning, she found Thomas sitting on the steps outside the schoolhouse. He had a pine cone in one hand, spinning it between his fingers like a toy. "Do you dream?" she asked gently. He looked up, surprised she'd spoken. "Sometimes," he said, "but it's not me dreaming. It's someone else. I just borrow them." Ellie sat beside him, startled by the weight of his voice. For a boy of 7 or 12, he carried centuries in his tone. "What do you see?" she asked. He was quiet for a while. Then, a woman crying over a crib, a fire in the woods, a man with no shadow standing in a window. He turned to her, and a girl who walks into a town and tries to make it remember. Ellie felt a chill run through her spine. Has the town forgotten? Thomas looked down at his hands. Not really, it just pretends. He placed the pine cone on the step beside him and stood. "I was supposed to be older," he said, "but I stopped when Mama asked me to." That sentence hit her like thunder. "What do you mean she asked you to?" Thomas shrugged. "I fell off the porch when I was little. She thought I died. She prayed I'd stay with her forever. And then I did." Ellie's breath caught. "And you never got older?" He shook his head. "She cries sometimes. She thinks I don't hear it, but I do. She's waiting for something to break." He walked away before she could ask more, disappearing into the schoolhouse's shadow. Later that day, Ellie confronted Clara. "He told me what happened," she said. "About the fall, about your prayer." Clara's eyes were glassy. She didn't deny it. "I was alone," she whispered. "My husband was gone. My sister was in the ground. He hit the stone so hard and I thought he was gone too." Ellie stayed silent. "I held him and I begged," Clara continued. "Begged him to stay as he was. Just one more day. Just one more moment." She wiped her eyes with her sleeve. "He never changed again." Clara looked at Ellie then, her voice breaking. "I think the whole town heard me." That night Ellie didn't sleep, not because of fear, but because the truth had begun to unravel. The stranger hadn't cast a spell. The town had done it to itself. Every person in their own small desperation had whispered the same hope into the wind. Let this moment stay, let the pain stop, let time rest. And time, somehow, had listened. If you've ever wished for time to freeze, ask yourself, what might you lose in the stillness? Because in Willow's Rest, dreams bleed through silence, and no one escapes untouched. Clara stopped opening the schoolhouse. It happened quietly. No announcement, no notice tacked to the door. One morning Ellie passed by and found it locked, the chalkboard erased, the desks untouched. Thomas sat alone on the steps, cradling a worn book. When Ellie asked where his mother was, he just said, "She's remembering." That afternoon, Ellie found Clara behind her house, seated in a wooden chair that faced the forest. A teacup sat untouched beside her. She didn't look up. "I used to dream of noise," Clara said softly. "Babies crying, chairs scraping floors, bells ringing. I wanted all of it. I begged for it." Ellie remained silent. "And then one by one we let it go. After Thomas, no one asked questions. No one tried again. We told ourselves it was peace." She closed her eyes. "But peace is when the storm ends, not when you shut the door and pretend it never came." Ellie sat on the steps nearby. "Thomas told me you still cry." "I try not to let him see," Clara said. But I do, because I remember the day I stopped. I remember holding him, seeing the blood, and whispering that I'd give anything, anything at all for him to stay. She looked down at her hands. I think the town heard me. Or maybe it just needed someone to say it first. Do you think it was your fault? No, Clara said, but I think I gave it permission. Ellie thought about the others, the postmaster, the librarian, the doctor. Each one had frozen in place the moment the pain became too heavy to carry. Each had chosen to forget in their own quiet way. Later that evening, Ellie visited Dr. Lenhard again. His home smelled of dust and ink, and he sat surrounded by books he no longer read. I spoke with Clara, Ellie said. She believes the town stopped because she asked it to. The doctor snorted. She gives herself too much credit. But something changed, didn't it? Not just Thomas, everyone. You, the sheriff, the preacher. He stared at the flickering lamp beside him. We were tired, he said, of burying children, of losing friends. There was a flu that year, a fire before that. So many coffins, so many farewells. He rubbed his temples. And then came silence, no more calls in the night, no more funerals, no more births either, but we didn't speak of that. We called it calm. We called it healing. Did you ever try to stop it? He laughed bitterly. How do you fight something that doesn't announce itself? Ellie leaned forward. Did anyone want to? He hesitated. Then, not at first. Outside, the village lights glowed like lanterns in fog, but no music played, no voices called. It was a stillness so absolute, it felt like grief stretched into forever. Clara had said the town was waiting for something to break. Ellie now believed that too, and maybe, just maybe, that something was her. She returned to her room at the inn and wrote until her hand cramped. Not facts, not quotes, but truths, raw, painful, urgent. She wrote of a town that bargained with silence, of a mother who wished too hard, of a boy stuck between years, of a peace too hollow to bear. She ended with one line, "This place is not cursed, it's in mourning." If you've ever buried a feeling so deep it stopped breathing, then you understand Willow's Rest. But unlike the people here, you still have a choice. Let it fester or let it speak. The attic of the inn wasn't locked, only forgotten. Marvin had mentioned it offhandedly one morning over coffee. Used to be storage, he said. Old trunks, some papers, nothing worth writing about. But Ellie was no longer chasing worth. She was chasing roots. She climbed the narrow stairs alone. The air grew colder with each step. Dust coated the railing like ash. At the top she found boxes stacked beside moth-eaten blankets and rusted lanterns. Light filtered in through a cracked window. She rummaged carefully, peeling back layers of old linens and yellowed receipts, until she found a box marked simply, Lenhard. Inside, ledgers, anatomical drawings, brittle photographs, and an envelope never sealed with no address. The handwriting was unmistakable. She had seen it in the doctor's journals. She unfolded the paper. October 20th, 1936. To the County Medical Board, I write not with a request for aid, but as a record of what I cannot explain. Since the 12th of this month, no child has been conceived, no person fallen ill, and no death has darkened our doors. At first we celebrated, then we wondered. Now I fear. A stranger visited us. His name was never known. He vanished with the turning of the leaves. Since then time has not stopped, but something within it has. A hush sits over the village, heavy and sacred and wrong. I send this letter to remember in case we forget. Dr. Harlan Lenhard Ellie read it twice, a third time. Then she folded it back carefully and placed it in her coat. She didn't confront the doctor. She didn't need to. He had tried to act once. He'd written the truth and then never mailed it. Whether from fear, doubt, or resignation, he had let it sit here for 12 years. Later that afternoon, she walked the length of the village, following its borders. She passed the school, the empty houses, the cemetery. Everything looked just as it had when she arrived. Everything looked the same, except now she saw it differently. Every shuttered window wasn't just closed. It was hiding something unspoken. Every step on the dirt road echoed with memory. And every face she passed looked at last not peaceful, but tired. Back at the inn, she stared at the letter. Something in her stirred. A memory. Her brother Daniel. He died in 1936, in Spokane. Pneumonia. He was only 10. She remembered the silence that followed. Her mother's eyes dulled. Her father stopped singing in the evenings. Ellie had buried her grief in words, in stories, in newspapers filled with lives she didn't know, And now here she was, in a place that had done the same, but to itself. She found a blank sheet in her notebook and began to write. To whoever finds this, Willow's Rest is not dead, but it is not alive. It chose quiet over pain, and in doing so, abandoned joy as well. They didn't sign a pact. They didn't speak a spell, but they let go of grief and something took its place. I came here for truth. I found memory instead, and memory, I've learned, is the only thing that fights silence. She didn't know who she would give it to, but for the first time since arriving, she knew what had to come next. If you've ever looked at the past and felt its weight pressing on your chest, then you understand what Ellie saw, because sometimes the story isn't what was taken, but what we let go of, just to breathe. Ellie found Sheriff Griggs sitting on the bench outside the old jailhouse, sipping something dark from a tin mug. The sun was setting behind the hills, staining the village in copper. He didn't look up when she approached. "You've spoken to them all now," he said. "You know what we did." "I know what you let happen," Ellie replied. He nodded slowly. "Makes no difference now." Ellie sat beside him. "You could have stopped it." He took a sip and stared at the dirt road. "We all could have, but we didn't. That's the truth. Not because we were tricked, not because someone cast a spell, but because we were tired, bone-tired. Grief was all we knew." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "The year before it happened, I buried my wife. Pneumonia took her in days. My daughter stopped speaking for months. I kept the town together with a badge and a bottle." Ellie waited. "Then that man showed up, didn't say a word, just watched. And we felt it. That stillness. It started before we even noticed. Fewer fights, fewer arguments. The crying stopped." He looked at her and his voice dropped. "And so did the dying." She studied his face. "Was there ever a moment where someone said, 'Yes, we accept this'?" "No," Griggs said. "That's the worst part. We didn't make a deal, we made a silence. And it filled us like fog. No one objected. We just drifted." Ellie took out the letter she'd found in the attic, the one Dr. Lenhard never sent. She handed it to him. He read it once, twice. Then his hands trembled. "He wrote this?" he asked. "Yes. He tried to break it. He didn't mail it." Griggs closed his eyes. "None of us did. We all had a chance to speak, to question it. But we told ourselves, it's better now. That's what you say when you're scared to lose again." Ellie's voice was steady. "You're still scared." Griggs looked away. "Wouldn't you be?" She didn't answer. He stood slowly, setting the mug aside. "There was a night in '39, he said, when a boy fell through the ice on the lake, should have drowned, but he didn't. He didn't even catch a cold. We pulled him out and he laughed like it was a game. That was when I knew it wasn't just stillness, it was a wall between us and everything else. A wall that doesn't let anything in," Ellie said. "Or out." He nodded. "We thought we were safe, but we're just trapped." She looked at him then, the weight of every story she'd uncovered pressing in her chest. "It can still change," she said. "Maybe," he replied, "but you'd have to make us remember." Ellie stood, the evening wind catching her coat. "I intend to." As she walked away, Griggs called after her, "There's one thing you should know." She turned. "The man who came. He never told us what would happen, but the day after he left, a tree in the square bloomed out of season. Bright red flowers. Beautiful, not natural. And every year since, it blooms again, same week, same color." He paused. "But this year it didn't." Ellie felt her breath catch. "Maybe it's starting to break," she whispered. "Maybe," he said. "Or maybe it's waiting for someone to finally say the words out loud. If you've ever held your breath to avoid pain, you know the cost. But in Willow's Rest, the cost wasn't a moment, it was 12 frozen years. And now, with one truth spoken, the thaw may have just begun. It started with a name." Ellie walked into the town square at noon, her voice clear and unwavering as she called out, "Margaret Wynne!" People stopped. Heads turned. A silence deeper than usual fell. "Clara's sister. Died giving birth in 1936. We buried her and buried the grief too. But we remember her, we remember the loss." No one moved. Ellie took another step forward. "And Daniel Moore," she said, "my brother. He died that same year, in Spokane. He was 10. She turned slowly, her gaze meeting the eyes of each person who dared come outside. "We've all lost someone, and we were promised peace in return for forgetting. But forgetting isn't peace. It's paralysis." A sound broke through the quiet. Kemp stepping out from the chapel. "She's right," he said, voice rough. "I've worn this collar for 15 years, but I haven't spoken truth in 12. Then Clara appeared beside him. her face pale but firm. "Thomas is not 7, she said. "He hasn't been 7 for a long time. I asked the world to keep him as he was, and it listened. But that wasn't a blessing, that was fear." Others came, Dr. Lenhard, Marvin, Miss Daly, faces Ellie had seen through windows, now standing in the square, called out by truth. "You all remember what you lost," Ellie said. "Say their names." For a moment there was only wind. Then one by one, Emily, Sam, Elias, Alice. Names long buried rose into the air like smoke. The townspeople spoke them in whispers, in sobs, in stunned confession. Some fell to their knees, others clutched one another. Ellie closed her eyes. This was what had been missing. Not death, not birth, but memory, grief, the ache that marks us as alive. Suddenly, thunder cracked overhead. A single bolt of lightning split the sky. Rain began to fall, not a drizzle but a torrential downpour, as if the heavens had been holding back just as long. The square, dry and dusty for years, turned to mud in seconds. People didn't run. They tilted their faces up, some laughed, some wept. Ellie stood beneath the rain, soaked through, heart racing, and then came the scream, high, sharp, from the direction of the schoolhouse. She ran. Inside, Thomas stood by the blackboard, fists clenched, eyes wide with pain. Clara burst through the door behind Ellie. "Thomas!" The boy stumbled back, clutching his chest. Ellie watched, frozen, as his features shifted, subtle at first, then unmistakable. His arms lengthened. His voice cracked. Tears streamed down his cheeks. He was aging. Years unfolding in seconds. Clara fell to her knees. "No, no, not like this," she whispered. Thomas cried out, not in fear, but release. His breath came heavy, his shoulders broadening, legs trembling. When it stopped, he looked at them with eyes no longer ancient, but human, clear. "I'm cold," he whispered. Clara wrapped her arms around him. Ellie stepped back, heart thudding. It had begun. The stillness was breaking. If you've ever seen a dam burst, not with violence but with truth, you know this moment. Willow's Rest had been holding its breath for 12 years. Now it was breathing again. Night fell quickly after the rain. The town was quieter than usual, but it was no longer the hollow silence Ellie had come to know. It felt different, like the final pause before breath returns. She stood outside the chapel, the scent of wet earth thick in the air, watching the windows for signs of movement. Then she saw him, standing at the edge of the woods, just beyond the last lamppost, as still as stone. The stranger. Same dark coat, same pale eyes, same impossibly calm face. He hadn't aged a day, but Ellie knew he hadn't just returned. He'd never left. She stepped toward him. "Who are you?" she asked. He didn't speak. "You did something to this town." Still no answer. His gaze wasn't cold. It wasn't kind either. It was empty. Not indifferent, but absent. Like looking into a place where time had forgotten to form meaning. Behind her, footsteps approached. Thomas, now older, stood at her side, breath hitching. "I've seen him before," he said. "In my dreams." The stranger turned his eyes on Thomas. Ellie moved to shield the boy, but Thomas stepped forward. "You watched us," he said. "All these years. Why?" Finally the stranger spoke. His voice was smooth. Too smooth. Like a sound made from memory instead of throat. "You asked," he said. Thomas froze. Clara appeared behind them, soaked, her face pale with realization. "I did," she whispered. "I asked for him to stay. I begged." The stranger looked at her, but not as a man would. His gaze held no blame, no recognition, only acknowledgement, as if her voice had reached something far beyond his control. "You weren't the only one," he said. "You all wished, and I listened." "But what did we give you?" Ellie asked. He tilted his head. "Nothing. I took nothing. I only made stillness where there was storm. You drank from the well. You chose not to leave." "You stopped us," Clara said. "No," he replied. "I gave you what you wanted. The moment you feared to lose, I sealed." Thomas looked down at his hands. "You stole time from me." The stranger blinked slowly. "Time cannot be stolen, only paused." Lightning cracked again, closer this time. Thunder rolled through the valley. "I don't want this anymore," Thomas said. "Then let go," the stranger said. It wasn't a threat, it wasn't even a command, it was a permission. Thomas stepped back. The air shifted. The stranger's form began to fade. Not vanish, not disappear, but dissolve like fog dispersing with sunrise. Clara reached for her son, but the boy's knees buckled and he let out a cry. Ellie moved fast, catching him, but his body burned with fever. He trembled in her arms. "What's happening?" she shouted. Clara was crying. "It's time catching up." All at once, Thomas screamed again, but it wasn't fear, it was pain, yes, but also release, like something long imprisoned finally being set free. The townspeople emerged, drawn by the noise, by the storm, by the pull of history snapping back into motion. They saw the stranger, now only a faint outline, dissolving into the mist. Marvin removed his hat. Kemp whispered a prayer. Dr. Lenhard stood frozen, tears running down his cheeks. The stranger looked at them all. "You remember now," he said, and with that he vanished. Not into the air, not into light, but into time, into its forward motion, its merciless flow, and in his absence the town shuddered, like a body learning to breathe again after too long underwater. If you've ever faced the ghost of what you asked for, then you understand this moment. The stranger didn't bring the silence. He only answered the question they dared not ask aloud. Now, the answer had changed. The next morning, a bell rang. Not loud, not ceremonial, just a soft chime from the chapel tower, rusted gears grinding themselves back into purpose. It echoed through Willow's Rest like the first word after years of silence. People emerged from their homes with cautious steps, eyes wide, hands trembling. Something was different, not just in the air, but in them. Ellie stood near the chapel steps, notebook forgotten in her pocket. She wasn't writing now, she was witnessing. At the doctor's house, Lenhard wept openly as he lit a lantern in the window. He hadn't lit that lantern in over a decade. Marvin repaired the inn's front railing. Miss Daly unlocked the library for the first time since 1937. And in a modest cottage on the southern edge of town, a woman named Ruth gave birth. The cry of the infant pierced the morning like a sunrise, high, new, real. Ellie arrived minutes later, led by Clara, who said only, "You'll want to see this." Ruth lay on the bed, sweating and radiant, the baby in her arms. The child's face was pink, squinting, already reaching. "I thought I couldn't have one," Ruth whispered. "I tried for years. Nothing ever stayed, but this time," she looked up at Ellie. "This time, he came through." The room fell quiet again. Reverent. Then word spread. An old woman, Mabel Grant, had passed in her sleep. She was 92. It wasn't tragic. It wasn't cruel. It was natural. Her body was found in her favorite chair, book in her lap, tea gone cold. Her lips still curled in the faintest smile. The town rang the bell for her. Once, clear and clean. Ellie helped carry her to the cemetery. As the others dug the grave, she noticed something remarkable. The earth was soft, not dry and cracked like before. It welcomed the spade. Later, at the funeral, Reverend Kemp spoke with a voice no longer broken. "We feared death, so we silenced life. But today we weep for Mabel, and we rejoice for Ruth's child. Today we are whole again." The townspeople nodded, eyes wet, hearts raw. Ellie stayed after everyone left. She walked the rows of headstones and stopped at one, now no longer the last, Margaret Wynne. She knelt, placed a hand on the stone and whispered, "You're remembered." Behind her, Thomas approached. He looked older still, taller. The fever had passed, but his eyes were no longer haunted. They were alive. "I don't dream the same way anymore," he said. "What do you see now?" Ellie asked. He thought a moment. "Tomorrow." She smiled. "Good," she said. "That's what you should see." They stood together in the wind, listening, not to silence, but to breath, to movement, to the sounds of a world learning to turn again. Ellie knew she would leave soon. Her work was done, but a part of her would stay, stitched into the village's return like thread into cloth. She had not saved Willow's Rest. It had saved itself, and all it had needed was the courage to remember. If you've ever watched life return to something you thought lost, then you understand this. Time is not cruel, it is not kind, it is simply motion, and now, at last, motion had returned. Ellie left Willow's Rest on the first clear morning in weeks. The sky was the kind of blue that only comes after a storm, deep, endless, unapologetic. The trees had begun to shed again, but this time the leaves fell with purpose, not in suspended animation. Each one drifted like a final word. She walked the road alone, her bag lighter than when she arrived. Not because she'd taken less, but because she was leaving something behind. At the last ridge, she turned back. The village was barely visible, nestled in the folds of forest, smoke curling from chimneys, a bell ringing faintly in the distance. The sound no longer haunted her. It soothed. She boarded the next train in silence, settled into her seat, and opened her notebook. The final page was blank. She didn't write. Not yet. Some stories need time before they become words. Back in Spokane, the newsroom buzzed as usual. Harold looked up from his desk when she walked in, eyebrows raised. "Well?" Ellie laid the notebook on his desk. "Print it all," she said. He flipped through the pages, skeptical at first, then slowly falling into the rhythm of her script. She didn't stay to watch him finish. Some stories aren't meant to be defended. They're meant to be believed. In the weeks that followed, letters arrived. Readers wrote about their own silences, griefs buried, wishes whispered, regrets that had frozen them in place, and how just maybe reading her story helped them move again. Ellie responded to none of them, but she read every one. She returned to her apartment, to her typewriter, to her quiet. But nothing about the silence felt heavy anymore. She could feel time now, its gentle tug, its constant invitation forward. One night, she lit a candle and wrote something new. Time is not a river. It is a breath, and we must choose each morning to exhale. She folded the page, placed it in an envelope, and addressed it to Willow's Rest. No stamp, no need. The town would receive it anyway. As fall deepened, she kept writing. Not about curses, not about strangers, but about memory, and about people brave enough to carry it. Because if you've stayed with us through this journey, you felt it too. That ache beneath the stillness, the tremor behind the quiet. Maybe you've asked yourself, what would I give to stop time? But the better question is, what would I lose if I did? Willow's Rest learned that answer the hardest way. They were lucky enough to remember it. So as this chapter closes, don't forget, silence is not safety, stillness is not healing, only motion brings life, only memory brings meaning. Thank you for walking this road with us. Before you go, make sure to subscribe so you never miss a journey like this again. And if you want to keep exploring the mysteries hiding in plain sight, click on the next video waiting for you on screen. Because every legend starts with a whisper, and some with a single breath.